Eleanor pulled the thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders, even though the autumn air wasn't particularly cold. It had been 2 years since Thomas was gone, 2 years since the light had dimmed in her world, leaving her adrift in a sea of quiet sorrow. The big old house felt hollow, echoing not with the laughter and shared dreams it once held, but with a profound, suffocating silence. Every room seemed to hold a painful memory, a ghost of happiness she couldn't quite grasp anymore. She moved through her days like a shadow, going to her quiet job at the local library, coming home to the house that was far too large for one person, existing rather than living. The garden, Thomas's pride and joy, had become a mirror of her inner state, neglected, overgrown, choked with weeds. It hurt too much to tend it, each forgotten corner a reminder of his hands in the soil, his easy whistle as he worked. One crisp morning, as Eleanor was locking the front door, gathering her strength for the walk to the library, a man approached the gate. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s, but lines of hardship were etched around his eyes. His clothes were clean but well worn, his shoulders stooped slightly, suggesting a burden carried for a long time. He didn't look like the men who usually passed by this quiet street. He stopped a respectful distance from the gate, his gaze falling on the tangled wilderness of the garden. He had kind eyes, she noticed, despite his tired appearance, a gentle brown that seemed to hold a quiet understanding. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice low and a little hesitant, but clear. "My name is David. I live in the area. Just been looking for work. I couldn't help but notice your garden. Looks like it needs a bit of a hand." Eleanor instinctively recoiled slightly. She wasn't used to strangers approaching her, especially not men who looked like they'd fallen on hard times. Society had taught her to be wary, but there was something in his manner, a quiet dignity, that held her. It, it does, she admitted, her voice rusty from disuse. "I'm good with plants," David continued, a faint, hopeful light entering his eyes. "My father was a gardener, taught me everything I know. I could help you clear it up. Get it looking nice again. I don't need much, just whatever you think is fair. Or maybe just some food for the day." A wave of something unexpected washed over Eleanor. Not fear, but a strange mix of compassion and tentative hope. The thought of the garden beautiful again felt like a breath of fresh air in her suffocating world. And the man, he wasn't demanding, wasn't pushy. He was simply offering his skill, his hands for a basic need. Hesitantly, she pushed open the gate a crack. I I don't usually have anyone work here," she said. "But, all right, the front garden is the worst. Could you start there? I can pay you something at the end of the day, and perhaps make you some lunch." A genuine smile touched David's lips, transforming his face. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. I promise I'll work hard." Eleanor walked away towards the library, a new unfamiliar feeling stirring within her, a tiny seed of anticipation. She couldn't shake the image of his kind eyes, his quiet gratitude. That day at the library felt different. The musty smell of old books, the hushed quiet, usually a comfort, felt less heavy. Her mind kept drifting back to the tangled mess of her front garden and the young man with the kind eyes who was, hopefully, bringing some order to it. When she returned home in the late afternoon, she stopped dead at the gate. The transformation was astonishing. The weeds were gone, neatly piled near the curb for collection. The edges of the flower beds were sharp and clean. The overgrown roses had been carefully, expertly pruned, their thorny branches now graceful arcs. The small, sagging wooden fence had been braced and repaired in places. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it looked cared for, respected. David was nowhere in sight, but his work was evident in every tidy row, every turned patch of soil. Eleanor walked slowly through the garden, running her fingers over a newly exposed patch of soft earth. Thomas would have loved this. A bittersweet pang went through her, but for the first time in a long time, the sweetness was stronger than the bitter. This wasn't just tidying, it felt like a small act of resurrection. That evening, sitting alone in her quiet house, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about David and the work he had done. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and a flicker of curiosity. Who was this man? What was his story? The next morning, she purposefully lingered by the window after getting ready for work. She saw him walking down the street, shoulders still a little slumped, but his steps seemed a touch lighter than the day before. Quickly, she went to the door. "David!" she called out softly. He stopped, turning, his face registering surprise. "Good morning," Eleanor said, pushing the gate open. "The garden. It looks wonderful. Thank you. Truly." "Just doing my job, ma'am," he said, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. "It's more than that," she insisted. "Please, would you like to come in for a moment? I made coffee, and I'd like to pay you properly for your work yesterday." He hesitated, then nodded shyly. Eleanor led him through the house, feeling a brief pang of embarrassment at its lived-in clutter, to the kitchen, the warmest room in the house. She poured him a mug of hot coffee and set a plate of biscuits in front of him. He ate and drank with a quiet grace that belied his circumstances. As he worked in the garden day after day, Eleanor began to offer him small tasks around the outside of the house, cleaning the gutters, washing windows, repairing a loose roof tile on the garden shed. He approached each job with the same quiet diligence and skill. She also learned, gradually, pieces of his story, not in a rush, but over cups of tea shared on the porch, or during a break in the shade of the old oak tree Thomas had loved. His name was David Miller. He had grown up in a small farming community several hours away. His father, a man he clearly adored, had taught him everything about working the land, finding solace and purpose in nurturing life. But a few years ago, a prolonged illness had struck his father. Medical bills mounted, and eventually, after his father passed, the small farm had to be sold to cover debts. David found himself with nothing, no family, nowhere to go. He'd come to the city seeking work, any work, but without connections or references, it was hard. He'd faced homelessness, hunger, the kind of desperation Eleanor could only vaguely imagine. The only thing that still felt right, still connected him to his father and his past, was working with plants, with the earth. It gave him a sense of peace, a quiet strength to keep going. Listening to his story, Eleanor felt a deep well of empathy open within her. His loss, while different from hers, resonated. He too had lost someone he loved dearly, lost his home, his sense of belonging. Yet he hadn't given up. He was still finding ways to put his skills to use, to find beauty in the world, even while struggling himself. The initial hesitant trust she had offered him began to blossom into something deeper. Respect, genuine liking, even a quiet camaraderie. They were two people, each carrying their own burdens, finding a small measure of comfort in each other's presence, in the shared focus on bringing life back to a neglected space. The garden wasn't just a project anymore. It was becoming a sanctuary for both of them. One afternoon, several weeks into David's work, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the lawn, Eleanor heard a familiar car pull into the driveway. Her heart sank slightly. It was Caroline, Thomas's mother. Caroline was a woman who meant well, Eleanor knew, but her grief over losing Thomas had settled into a permanent, sharp edge. She visited often, sometimes unexpectedly, ostensibly to check on Eleanor. But more often than not, her visits left Eleanor feeling inadequate and judged. The house wasn't kept the way Thomas would have kept it. Her clothes weren't quite right. She was too thin, too withdrawn. Caroline, in her own pain, seemed unable to see Eleanor's. Eleanor opened the door, forcing a smile. "Caroline, hello. I wasn't expecting you." "Eleanor," Caroline said, her eyes immediately scanning past her, into the house. "I was just driving by and thought I'd stop in. How are you managing?" Her gaze then fell upon David, who was wiping down his tools by the shed. His presence outside the house was immediately noticeable. Caroline's expression tightened. "And who is this?" she asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. "Eleanor, are you letting strangers just wander onto the property? What are you thinking?" "He's not a stranger, Caroline," Eleanor replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "This is David Miller. He's been helping me with the garden and some small repairs. He's been wonderful." Caroline's gaze lingered on David, her disapproval clear. "Helping? He looks like a vagrant." "Eleanor, you can't just invite people like this onto Thomas's property. It's not safe. What will the neighbors think? Honestly, you need to be more careful. Her voice dropped to a stage whisper, though David was far enough away not to hear the words themselves. He surely felt the weight of her judgment. He's probably just after something. Thomas worked hard for this house. You need to protect it. A flush rose on Eleanor's cheeks, but she held her tongue, refusing to defend David against such unfair, unfounded suspicion, refusing to let Caroline's prejudice dictate who she allowed into her life. David finished packing his tools, gave Eleanor a quiet, polite nod, and left, his shoulders seeming to slump a little more than usual. Caroline stayed for another hour, criticizing the dust she found on a bookshelf, expressing concern about Eleanor's pallor, suggesting she should really think about selling the house if she couldn't manage it properly. Eleanor endured it, counting the minutes until she was alone again, the visit leaving her drained and disheartened. In the weeks that followed, David continued his work. The back garden, even more neglected than the front, began to yield to his patient efforts. He talked about plants with a quiet passion that was infectious, identifying species Eleanor hadn't known were buried beneath the weeds, explaining their needs, their seasons. He even started a small patch for vegetables, gently encouraging Eleanor to help him plant seeds. The simple act of putting her hands in the soil felt surprisingly therapeutic, a small connection to the living world outside her grief. One afternoon, while tidying her bedroom, looking for a specific scarf, Eleanor reached into the drawer of her dressing table. Her fingers brushed against the velvet box where she kept her most cherished jewelry. She pulled it out. Empty. Panic seized her. Inside that box was the pearl necklace Thomas had given her on their wedding day. It wasn't hugely valuable in monetary terms, but it was priceless to her, a tangible piece of their happiest memory. She frantically searched the drawer, the dressing table, the floor around it. Nothing. She cast her mind back. When had she last seen it? She always put it back in the box. Had someone been in her room? Only the cleaners and David. He'd done some repair work on the sash window in the bedroom a week or so ago, replacing a broken cord. The suspicion, cold and unwelcome, settled in her gut. He had seemed so kind, so trustworthy, but he was also a man with nothing, a man who admitted he'd been desperate. Caroline's harsh words echoed in her mind. He's probably just after something. Her heart ached with conflicting emotions. The trust she had so tentatively built felt shattered. How could she have been so foolish? Yet the image of his quiet kindness, his genuine love for the garden, warred with a dark suspicion. When David arrived the next morning, carrying his tool bag, Eleanor met him at the door, her face pale, her voice trembling slightly. "David," she said, her gaze direct, I'm missing something. My pearl necklace. It was in my bedroom. It's very important to me. You were working in there last week. Did you see it? Or maybe find it?" David's face went still. His kind eyes, usually so open, clouded over with hurt and confusion. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, Are you accusing me?" "No," Eleanor said quickly, but her eyes must have held the doubt she couldn't voice. "No, I'm just asking. It's gone, and you were the only person besides me in that room. I don't know what to think." He took a step back, as if physically recoiling from her words. "Mrs. Eleanor, I would never steal from you or anyone. I swear." His voice was filled with a deep, wounded sadness. "I know how it must look, but it wasn't me." Eleanor looked at him, torn. His distress seemed genuine, but the necklace was gone. And who else could it be? I need time to think, David," she said, her voice weary. "I'm sorry." He nodded slowly, his shoulders visibly slumping. "I understand, Mrs. Eleanor. If you need me, I'll finish up weeding that back corner." He turned and walked toward the back garden, but the usual spring was gone from his step. Eleanor watched him go, a heavy knot of regret tightening in her chest. Had she just destroyed the one hopeful connection she'd made in 2 years? David finished the weeding, left his tools neatly by the shed, and disappeared. He didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. Weeks turned into a month. The weeds began to creep back into the garden beds. Eleanor told herself it was for the best. She couldn't have someone in her life she suspected, no matter how kind he seemed. But his absence left a new kind of ache, a silence where there had been quiet conversation, a stillness where there had been purposeful work. She missed his quiet presence, his gentle spirit, the way his face lit up when he talked about plants, and the guilt about accusing him, about letting suspicion override the trust she had felt, gnawed at her. A few months later, a wedding invitation arrived in the mail. It was from Caroline's niece, a lovely young woman Eleanor was fond of. Despite the awkwardness, Eleanor felt a pull towards reconnecting with that side of Thomas's family, a last thread of their shared past. She accepted the invitation, dreading seeing Caroline, but determined to go. The wedding was held in a beautiful old church. Eleanor found a seat towards the back, watching the ceremony with a mixture of melancholy and quiet warmth for the young couple. Afterwards, at the reception, she mingled awkwardly, accepting condolences and polite small talk. She spotted Caroline across the room, surrounded by family. As Caroline turned, laughing at something someone said, the light caught her necklace. Eleanor froze. Around Caroline's neck, gleaming softly, was the pearl necklace. Her necklace. Thomas's gift. A wave of disbelief, then cold certainty, washed over Eleanor. She stared, rooted to the spot as Caroline chatted, completely oblivious. It wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen by David. Caroline had it. Eleanor walked across the room, her legs feeling unsteady. She approached Caroline, who smiled, surprised to see her. "Eleanor, dear, I'm so glad you came," Caroline said. Eleanor's voice was low, carefully controlled. "Caroline, my necklace. The pearl one. You're wearing it." Caroline's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, this?" She touched the necklace. "Yes, isn't it lovely? I just borrowed it. I meant to tell you." "Borrowed it?" Eleanor's voice rose slightly. "Caroline, it was in my jewelry box. How did you—" Caroline's face hardened defensively. "When I visited last month, I saw it on your dresser. It wasn't in the box, mind you. Just, lying there." This was a lie. Eleanor was meticulous about putting it away. And frankly, Eleanor, with the state of things, letting that man onto the property, I worried it wasn't safe. It's a family piece, you know. Thomas inherited it from his grandmother before he gave it to you. I thought I'd keep it safe for a while." Her tone implied Eleanor wasn't capable of keeping it safe herself. Eleanor stared at her, speechless for a moment. Safe? Caroline had gone into her bedroom, opened her jewelry box, or found it lying there in a blatant invasion of privacy, taken the necklace, and said nothing. And because of it, Eleanor had wrongly accused David, wounded him, driven him away. The injustice of it, the casual cruelty of Caroline's actions, wrapped in a misguided cloak of concern and proprietary grief, was staggering, and the wave of regret for how she had treated David was overwhelming. "It wasn't yours to take, Caroline," Eleanor said finally, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and pain. "It was a gift from Thomas to me, and because you took it without telling me, I accused someone else of stealing it, someone who was kind to me, someone who needed help." Caroline looked taken aback by the force of Eleanor's emotion, but she didn't apologize. She merely clutched the necklace more tightly. "Well, I think we just see things differently, Eleanor. It's a family heirloom. It belongs here, with the family." Eleanor looked at Caroline, at the necklace, and a profound sadness settled over her. Not just for the necklace or the accusation, but for the chasm between them, fueled by Caroline's unresolved grief and inability to see beyond her own pain. In that moment, Eleanor knew she couldn't continue trying to bridge that gap. It was too painful, too damaging to her own fragile healing. She needed to protect herself, to prioritize her own well-being over maintaining a toxic connection to her past life. With a quiet resolve, she turned and walked away from Caroline, from the wedding, from the suffocating weight of obligation. In the following weeks, the guilt over David gnawed at her relentlessly. She couldn't bear the thought that her lack of faith, her quickness to suspect, had hurt him after all he had been through. She remembered the quiet dignity with which he had accepted her unjust accusation, his heartbroken denial. He hadn't shown anger, just sadness. She had to find him. She had to apologize. Finding him was not easy. He had disappeared back into the city's anonymity. Eleanor started asking around, showing his photo, a quick snap she'd taken on her phone of him pruning the roses. She visited local garden centers, community gardens, shelters that helped young men. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The search was difficult, often discouraging, but Eleanor was driven by a deep need to right her wrong, to show David that she finally knew the truth, that she believed in his goodness. One Saturday afternoon, several months after she'd last seen him, Eleanor was helping out at a community garden project on the other side of town, a way she had found to connect with her renewed love for gardening and give back. She was bent over a flower bed, her hands in the soil when a voice spoke nearby. "Mrs. Eleanor?" Eleanor's head snapped up. Standing a few feet away, looking healthier and stronger than she had ever seen him, was David. His clothes were still simple, but clean and neat. There was a lightness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Tears immediately sprang to her eyes. "David!" she cried, scrambling to her feet, wiping dirt on her trousers. "Oh, David, thank goodness. I've been looking everywhere for you." He looked surprised, but his smile was gentle. "You have?" "Yes." The words tumbled out, breathless and urgent. "David, I am so sorry. About the necklace. I know what happened now. I know you didn't take it. It was found. I should never have doubted you. Can you ever forgive me?" David stepped closer, his kind eyes filled with understanding. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said softly, "I told you. I knew you were good-hearted. It hurt when you didn't believe me, but I understood you were hurting too. I didn't steal your necklace. I knew you'd figure it out eventually." Relief washed over Eleanor, so potent it made her knees weak. They sat down on a nearby bench, and she told him everything. About Caroline, about the wedding, about finding the necklace. Then David shared his story since leaving her house. After the accusation, feeling utterly defeated, he had hit rock bottom. But something about the brief period of trust and hope he had found working for Eleanor had lingered. He'd remembered her kindness, the way she had seen him as a person, not just a problem. It had given him a sliver of strength to reach out for help. He'd connected with a local outreach program, found a temporary shelter, and with the help of a social worker, he'd started to rebuild his life. His gardening skills had been his salvation. He'd found steady work with a local landscaping company, earned enough to rent a small room, and was saving. He was a different man now, standing taller, his eyes clearer. They talked for hours until the sun began to set. They talked about their past, their losses, and tentatively, their dreams for the future. There was a deep connection between them, born of shared pain and unexpected kindness. Over the following months, their friendship blossomed, quietly and naturally, like the flowers David had so carefully tended in Eleanor's garden. They spent time together, sharing meals, walks, working side by side in her garden, which David slowly brought back to glorious life. Eleanor found joy returning to her days, a sense of hope she hadn't felt possible. David found a home, not just a place to live, but a place where he was truly seen, valued, and loved. Their relationship deepened, gently, surely. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a quiet, steady growth built on mutual respect, shared understanding, and a profound appreciation for the second chance life had given them both. They were two souls who had weathered storms alone, finding solace and strength in sailing together. Eventually, they married in a small ceremony in the now flourishing garden, surrounded by the vibrant colors David had nurtured. Eleanor wore a simple dress and the pearl necklace Thomas had given her, a symbol now not just of past love, but of a journey through grief towards a new, unexpected happiness. Sometime later, Eleanor felt a stirring of compassion for Caroline. She had healed enough to see her former mother-in-law not just as a source of pain, but as a woman consumed by her own grief. She reached out, invited her for tea. It wasn't a complete fairy tale reconciliation, but it was a step. Carolyn, softer now, perhaps seeing the genuine happiness Eleanor had found, offered a hesitant apology for her past behavior. They began a new tentative relationship built on acceptance rather than expectation. Today, Eleanor and David look back on their journey, marveling at the twists and turns that brought them together. The pain of the past is still a part of their story, a quiet reminder of what they have overcome, but it no longer defines them. They live their lives side by side, nurturing their garden, their relationship, and their shared dreams. Eleanor knows that Thomas would be happy for her, happy that she found joy and love again. David, finally at peace, has found a family and a home where he is cherished. Their story is a testament to the unexpected places hope can bloom, and how sometimes a simple act of kindness, a willingness to look past appearances, can transform not just a neglected garden, but two broken lives, bringing them together in a beautiful, unexpected harvest of love and healing.